Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic Hypersonic.
I'm Barry P. Cook, and I'm here to do a review for you of Godzilla X Kong, The New Empire. This is a film that picks up right where Godzilla vs. Kong left off, and it brings back three of the characters from that film. The doctor lady, her adopted daughter Gia, who is from the Skull Island tribe, and the podcast blogger guy. The lady doctor guy is now in charge of all things Kong at Monarch, which basically has her overseeing Kong adapting to his new life in Hollow Earth, where he wound up after his fight with Godzilla, having come from, of course, Skull Island. She's living, of course, with her adopted daughter Gia on the surface, and Gia is trying to adapt to her new reality. And while all of this is going on, Godzilla is living on the surface of the Earth, although underwater, but on the surface as compared to Hollow Earth, and is also protecting the Earth from other Titans that would try to harm it. So he's pretty much left to his own devices because ultimately he defends humanity as opposed to trying to harm it. And we see that Kong is struggling a little bit to adapt to his new home in Hollow Earth because he's by himself. He doesn't have any of his kind to, hang out with. And in fact, he is himself preyed upon by some of the other creatures in Hollow Earth, but of course, he deals with them pretty handily. The thing is that apparently there's this evil giant ape orangutan person called the Scar King who was imprisoned by Godzilla a long time ago in a subterranean part of the Hollow Earth that's like a fire area. And he wants to get out so that he can conquer the surface world. And Jaya's people, who on Skull Island were wiped out, but who were not wiped out entirely because they inhabit a subterranean area of Hollow Earth, have been psychically calling to her for help because they need her as one of the Skull Island members of her tribe to awaken Mothra so that Mothra, who is the queen of monsters, can help Godzilla defeat the Scar King, who has in his control another lizard type being that freezes stuff and that in fact was responsible for Earth's last ice age. So what ends up happening is the Dr. Lady person and Jaya and the blogger person, as well as a new character, a Titan veterinarian, who early in the film replaces one of Kong's teeth because it becomes infected, all go down to Hollow Earth to investigate why they're getting this signal, what the source of the signal is, because the signal is not only being used to psychically contact Jaya, but it's also being felt by their instruments, and they don't know what it is, and they're trying to figure out. So they go down there, and in the process, they discover that all of this is going on, that, the Scar King is trying to escape, and that they need to get Godzilla down there so he can help Kong and Mothra fight off this Scar King and keep him from accessing the surface. And of course, in the process of all of this, there are awesome, awesome monster fights, just ridiculously awesome monster fights, I should say. And surrounding all of that was, I'm happy to say and surprised to be saying, a lot of good human character stuff. I didn't really find that to be the case with the previous movies in this monster series, but in this movie there's a lot of good human, moment that I thought really made the film delightful. On top of that, Kong in this movie is almost a human character because he's portrayed as a three-dimensional being, not just a mindless, giant, ass-kicking entity, more so than in the previous films. He has a very quote-unquote human side to him, as it were. And he even befriends like a baby Titan gorilla that initially is hostile towards him, but only because he's under the thumb of this Scar King, as is everyone in his community, the other ape beings. And I thought that made the movie much better than some of the other movies in this series. You can really feel for the Kong character like he's a person, because they show him to have emotional depth, to be a real character in the film with his own, of course, unspoken, mostly, narrative. And I say mostly because he does communicate with the Jaya character. So all of that together, I thought made this a really good movie And I'm surprised by that because I haven't thought too much of the movies leading up to this outside of the fact that they're very CGI heavy, which I always find fun. But this is actually a full fledged, fully realized film with a narrative that not only made sense, which again, for me, is different from the other movies in this franchise because I didn't really understand what was happening. It just seemed like a jumbled mess to me every time. From moment to moment, it was just, I didn't see a clear narrative in those films. And in this one, there is from beginning to end. And so I thought that was great. There are things you could critique about the movie. For example, at least one point in the film, there's a huge exposition dump, which always sort of takes me out of the experience, right? Because you realize that you're being given a bunch of exposition. But in this case, I didn't mind it too much because it explained stuff. And I prefer that to watching a movie where there's very little said about stuff that doesn't make sense without something being said to explain it. So I thought they did a good job of explaining everything in this movie, even though it was sort of exposition heavy. I didn't mind it. It took me out of it. It made me realize, okay, this is exposition, and you see the wheels turning in the writing room. But I didn't mind it in this case because it explained everything. It made everything in the film make sense. I knew why everything was happening. I knew what everyone's motivations were, and that I think made it a better film than the previous ones where I don't really remember feeling as though they did that. Another critique I would have is that I don't understand the telepathy thing. Like, how did these people contact Jaya telepathically? Like, I guess they might have explained that in a previous film, how these people had telepathic abilities and how Jaya, who's the last of their kind, at least from the Skull Island tribe, has telepathic abilities, but I don't remember them explaining it. So it's just kind of one of those things that just is, it seems like. I could be wrong about that. But I don't know. I thought they could have put a tiny bit of exposition in this film to explain that, even if they already did for people that maybe didn't see the previous movies for some reason. They didn't. So there's just a lot of like moments where there's telepathic communication going on and they don't really explain, oh, these people are telepathic. Like, well, how did that happen? I mean, I don't know. Maybe you don't need an explanation because it's a movie where there are giant creatures and they don't really ever explain that except to say there are giant creatures. So I don't know. That might not be a fair criticism, but I would have liked an explanation of that. And I didn't think Godzilla was in it enough. His name is the first word of the title of this film, but he's really kind of a background character. And on the one hand, it doesn't bother me because I really liked, as I said, what they did with Kong in this film and how they gave him depth and made him a fully realized character, a three-dimensional character. And I don't think they could have done that if they had spent more time on Godzilla, because it would have taken away time to do that unless the movie were longer. So he would have just been another one-dimensional, killing machine monster or whatever. But if they could have sort of balanced it out a little bit more without sacrificing that, with maybe a few more minutes added to the runtime, I would have liked it. I would have liked to have seen more Godzilla. Then again, the moments we do get with him are pretty freaking radical. He's pretty awesome for the amount of time that he's in this movie. It's just pretty killer watching him on screen. And the same is true for Kong. But, that's really all I have to say. I really, really like this film. I liked it better than the previous ones. I thought the narrative made a lot of sense all the way through from beginning to end, even though it was accomplished with a bit of extra exposition. And the action scenes were great as well. The fight scenes and everything were really, really good. And Mothra, we get to see Mothra, which is very, very cool. And, the human stories were, I thought, more significant in this film than the previous ones. And that's another thing that made it good. The few drawbacks that I mentioned, I don't think really take that much away from it. I would say this is a 7 or 8 out of 10, if not better. So go check it out and let me know what you think of it. For now, I'm going to get out of here. I'll be back with another video soon. Until I return, I wish you peace and long life.